Hello everyone, welcome to another whiteboard discussion. Today we're going to be talking about what I call the conflicts. This is more of a philosophical breakdown, but it helps explain why certain things happen in a cybersecurity program. Taking it from a high level, this is primarily geared for beginners, but just introduces the idea that there's three major conflicts in what drive a cybersecurity program when you get down to the brass tacks of things. So I'm going to write conflicts up here in the top corner and erase that and explain these for you. And the reason I'm doing this is frequently we get into a cybersecurity program or we help start a cybersecurity program at a company, and we are often very puzzled on why certain decisions are driven and taken more than others. Like, why didn't we do something like segmentation is answered by the fact of knowing the three conflicts and how they drive things. So let me draw this for you. You'll see I'm putting this rather in a circular format. On purpose, because they will both drive and overwhelm and support each other as they conflict and fight with each other. That says requirements, even though it's not very clear. And this would be, I already did one, sorry, this should be need. So really it's what you want, what you need, and what you're required to do. And they will all fight and conflict with each other. It's important that you keep your wants on top, because it helps you understand and remember that what a company wants, either positively so or negatively so, will completely overwhelm what they're required to do and what they need to do. And let me explain that. So you may have requirements depending on what industry you're in. You may have financial or regulatory requirements. So if you're in banking, you have regulatory requirements. If you're in medical or healthcare, you have requirements that you have to meet, right? You have to protect PHI, you may have PCI requirements, right? Et cetera, et cetera. There are lots of requirements that can drive your cybersecurity program to make a choice to buy something or to perform something a certain way all day long. And depending on what you do in your business, how you handle data, if you remember from the dial cybersecurity and some of the other things, that data and data privacy is actually the core of cybersecurity. You need to keep that in mind at all times. They may drive your needs, and you may have very powerful needs, but if you don't want to do them, if you have a negative desire to actually perform the requirements and the needs, it will overwhelm. It will win the conflict almost every time. The only time this gets tipped is if either you have an incident or you have ransomware, you have an impact in such a way that it either forces a requirement on you or makes the need so powerful that it begins to overwhelm the negative desire to do it. Now, conversely, if you have such a positive desire to do cybersecurity, like you come from a place where there was a strong cybersecurity culture and you're like, I don't understand in this new company that I'm at why they don't require certain things, they may not even need certain things, but you may want to bring in a lot of cybersecurity. That's a rather unusual situation, but it could happen, definitely. Let me do this as an example, because I think everything is best done as examples. Maybe this will make more sense. I'm going to use one of my favorites, which is a golf company. Because I have, over the years, worked with too many, unfortunately, companies who have had incidents or malware, or just have bad security, and they've had a problem because of it. They've lost something, access, files, whatnot, or they've had something destroyed, for all three of these. And unfortunately, out of those, if I had to say there's two massive offenders, one of them is golf companies, because as oddball as that sounds, I've been to at least, I don't know, a dozen golf companies who have had incidents, one of them more than once, where they don't want to learn. They have such a negative desire that it overwhelms the fact that they have next to no requirements. Even though they have an intense need many times, it's just not strong enough to overwhelm this negative piece here. Because anything you do on cybersecurity, if you haven't figured it out, slows down your ability to make transactions. This is one of the chief reasons why startups don't start with really, really super strong cybersecurity, is because in the beginning, speed is very important when it comes to a startup in almost every instance. To be successful in that company, you have to be able to move quickly and build in money and get a strong stream of money going, or else that company will tank. Well, if you slow things down by putting security in place, it tends to decrease the odds of success. And so that's partially why in those situations you don't see a lot of strong security in beginning companies, and also why startups are attacked very often by adversaries, because they're wise to this. Okay, so back to golf companies. No requirements really. They may have a little bit of PCI requirement because they take transactions. So a typical golf company has access to a golf course, or they sell products like golf clubs, golf balls, that kind of thing. They may sell services like a golf pro services or things of that nature. And so they have financial things that they're protecting. They have records, they have credit cards and so on. They may have appointment times. They have a variety of things that need protection, need strong cybersecurity, but they have a negative want because anything they put here, for cybersecurity, they segregate out parts of their network, they control their shares, they have a backup system, they hire a professional to actually manage and monitor it, like they get a CISO, or they get a cybersecurity team, so they have a security manager in there. Any of those things impacts their bottom line. And that can be something that, so far in my experience as a golf company, negative, they're not going to do it. Now, if you happen to own a golf company and you have a wonderful, massive, beautiful cybersecurity program that actually takes care of security, you've got security professionals and they do a great job with that, hit me up with a comment, because I'd love to see a positive version of this, because so far, the ones I've been to and helped, negative. And really, if I had to explain why negative wants exist, it kind of boils down to three things. Systemic room. And part of it is just culture. And I think this is what kills a lot of golf companies. Negative culture or positive culture. You have a culture of not doing cybersecurity or not taking security seriously. This was probably most hospitals before 2000, definitely, and maybe even before 2010, depending on how you want to look at it. Definitely pre-WannaCry, that was a lot of big companies who just did not have a culture of taking security seriously because they weren't forced to. There was not a regulatory requirement. There wasn't enough need to overwhelm the negative want to do so. The other reason is leadership, as they call themselves. Your top-level guides, top-level leaders, usually they have a C in their title somewhere. If they don't believe in security, it doesn't matter how much there's a ground roots push to make security happen, it's not going to happen. They have to buy into it, or else they won't drive it, they won't asset it, they won't allocate assets to it, they won't fund it. So leadership has to be involved in cybersecurity, or else it won't move. They'll just drive a negative desire. And the last thing, and probably one of the more critical, is the bottom line. Anything that impacts the amount of money you make on a regular basis will be looked at negatively, period. And it drives probably the most influence on the negative desire for cybersecurity, because any security will impact your bottom line. Eventually, after you get through the negative zone, you actually make more money on the other side of being secure, and not just because you don't get incidents, because you actually be safer overall. And where you're losing money at now that you don't see, you will quit losing money. Cybersecurity brings that part in, especially if you do anything on the internet. But for the most part, these three things kill any need or any requirement even. Because if you don't want to do something, it can be more powerful than any requirement. As long as you don't get caught, you can continue forward even though you might be required to do something. So let's talk, I said two before I get too far away. Like one of them was, like I said, golf. And not to be mean, but the other one is manufacturing. I've probably been to dozens of manufacturers who make basically industry floors that make things. And they're also one of the worst for performing and having great cybersecurity. They have probably one of the more driving needs, because they have floors full of smart devices a lot of times that are connected to other IoT that are typically not well protected and generally need to be, or they have schematics and designs that, maybe they have some minor security in there, but they don't have segmentation and it's not being backed up. I can't tell you how many times I've been to a manufacturing facility who's had an incident and they don't have an effective backup system, keyword they're being effective, so they lose the schematics or the diagrams that they're feeding into their machines to make money. So they're like, okay, we have so much in production, but we don't have access to these master diagrams or schematics now to load the machines up to teach them what to do. because they don't just sit there. So they have whatever's in the machine, but generally they retool and reset these machines per job. And if you lost access to this, it kills you. So why wouldn't you protect this? But frequently they don't. There's no backup system on this kind of information, even though that's one of the more critical items in their facility. I mean, flat out, as much as I hate this wording, you do a crown jewels analysis or high priority target kind of analysis for a reason. It tells you where your critical assets are. And that kind of analysis, which is very inexpensive, could tell you, yes, your schematics, your intellectual property is integral to you making good money. Protect it to death. Have backups of it that are secured, encrypted, even in maybe a cold backup for any of that, so that you don't lose if you get ransomware or if you get taken offline or you get damaged in some fashion. It just seems basics. But again, that situation is a great one to talk about in the cycle. So the requirements for that are negative. There's no requirement at all, right? They have an intense need. It's very strong, but the want is very negative typically. Why? Because it slows things down, right? That's more things you have to keep track of, and time is money. So especially on an industry floor like that, where things have to be automated and processed as much as possible, inserting in checks, inserting in backup procedures, which may require your devices not to be functional for a period of time while you're doing the backup, because you may only have so many versions of that schematic or access to it, and not only just backing up complete versions, but many times alterations are made on the fly for a particular task to meet a customer's needs, and those may only be sitting on like the engineer's computer. There's a massive need for that, but there's still this negative want. There's negative desire to do so because this hits the bottom line. And generally that culture and the leadership there, at least in my experience, is not positive to making cybersecurity happen over a floor. The few open door conversations I've had where you just are approaching them to have a discussion have been intensely negative towards anything, right? And very accusatory back towards, hey, should I even consider this? Why should I consider this? There's very much a struggle there. But honestly, once you have this synchronized down, just like automation sped up and made this industry practice more efficient, so would cybersecurity help you respond better. Because the few times that you needed to, for example, spin up a new industry, I need to create a new location really quickly that will work and do the same thing that I have going on at, say, another manufacturing facility, you would have a backup that you could just restore out of without shutting down anything at the other location, or have procedures that you could move over or set things up well once the machines were in place. You have like a centralized store for everything, so controlling information flow would be much better. There's many advantages to having a good cybersecurity program here. Plus, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but you could go on and on and on. Knowing that this is what drives a lot of questions, and the answers to them is important. So, why not segment? Getting more generic here, I'm gonna keep beating up on those two. Why not segment my network? You go to work in a new place and you're like, hey, why isn't this segmented? It should be segmented. Because there's a cost, right? That bottom line. You got to take time off. You have to break the network up. You have to redesign and in some cases re-architect large parts of the network just to make a single segment come online. There's not necessarily a desire to do that. The negative desire is too much. It could be an easy answer. Hospitals, good example. Why isn't the emergency room segmented from the rest of the network? Why isn't the areas where patients are at and they're being taken care of, why aren't they segregated from the rest of the network? Why isn't the nurse's station completely off network and has to go through a bridge to get to any of those devices? Why, I could go on, why are all the heart monitors not on their own segment? Why are not all the, life support machines on a different segment? Because you should micro-segment when you can. It does add cost. There's a cost in maintenance and there's a cost in performing that. But at the same time, you get massive security, especially for things like that where they're life-saving. If they go down or they go offline, people die. It's a direct correlation to, if this doesn't work, people are dead, right? You're dead. Done. right? So for those, it's kind of a simplistic thing. It's harder when you're a golf course or manufacturing or even a investment company, which is another offender investment companies and law firms, also bad offenders. Segregate, break things up, have storage, use encryption, don't let things sit there in plain text at rest. I mean, all these good things, but it's like, so why don't we encrypt data at rest? There's a good one. DoD requires it, absolutely. If you have data, you should have it encrypted at rest. Healthcare industry, data is supposed to be encrypted at rest. That's so if someone does get access to your machine, all they get is encrypted junk. Whether you use whole drive or partial drive encryption, or you have encryption on in some other fashion, you're just encrypting the file. All those are good. It isn't obvious if I'm an attacker and I get in and your data is all encrypted when it's sitting on a file share somewhere. Even if I gained access to it and I grabbed it, I have no way to decrypt it. So you have safety even past your network in some ways with encryption. But there's a cost. How do you encrypt and decrypt? There's a cost in time. That's too slow. That's probably the biggest reason why people don't put security on email. The number one gateway to getting you screwed or getting an incident is email. It's up there with people. Both of these will kill you and save you at the same time. Email communication can make the difference between business and non-business. Humans can be the most greatest asset in your company, but they're also the worst one too, because they're the ones that are going to make sure you have an incident sometime in the future. So both of these are kind of bad. With email, you should have security on it. It's a no-brainer, it seems like, right? But look at your email. How many of you have HTML email? You can tell because if you look at it and everything's only text, you know that you're running text only, which is probably the safest mode to put email on. It's probably the number one thing you can do to protect your email. Make everything flat, make everything text. Quarantine attachments would be another thing. I could go on here. Because if you just push everything as text, there are no links to accidentally click on. It takes effort to go copy that out of there and paste it into a browser. It prevents automations from happening. It prevents the preview window being a potential exploit by bad guys. It prevents so many things. And even if you forward emails, it prevents the links from becoming active in case you do forward and they get rewritten. I mean, there's so many things here that just doing this right here alone fixes, but it's ugly. It's very ugly, and people like convenience. And hence it doesn't happen in most cases. Worst off, it's not built in that way. Microsoft wants you to use the rich environment as much as possible. So they don't enforce that this is a safe method. They push everything as HTML, hopes that they can control it, right? And it's not just them, it's anybody actually. The default out of the box is the richest, most essential, compelling mode, which unfortunately is also the one that gets exploited a lot. This is very simplistic, but it's also very safe. You just have to find a reason to figure out how to get here. Again, the cycle, not required, may not be an intense need. So is this positive or negative? The want. In most cases, it's a negative desire to make the change. So you keep this, even though there is some need on this part that this should not be here. This cycle can pretty much explain anything you come across and you're scratching your head trying to understand why they did or didn't do something they should have. So I'm going to cut it there. Again, just a simple discussion on the conflicts, the wants, needs, and requirements of cybersecurity and why they can drive your cybersecurity program one way or the other. And so with that in mind, hopefully you like this. If you did, give it a like. And if you like what you're seeing on the channel and the content that's coming out, please subscribe so you can find and see the future content as we move forward. Thanks for your time.